Her husband threw her into a blizzard the same night doctors told her she'd never have children. No coat, no warning, just divorce papers on a marble floor and a locked door. She collapsed in a bus shelter with nothing left to lose. And that's when the most dangerous man in Chicago stopped his convoy and said, "Bring her inside." What happened next in that fortress of a mansion changed both their lives in ways neither of them saw coming. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit like and follow me to the very end because this one doesn't slow down. The snow came in sideways off Lake Michigan, the kind of storm that didn't announce itself. It arrived like a verdict. By 8 o'clock on a Thursday in January, Chicago had vanished behind a wall of white so dense that streetlights became nothing more than pale suggestions, blurred and useless at the edges of the dark. Serena Whitlock stood in the foyer of the house on Birchwood Lane and tried to remember how to breathe. She had been holding it together since noon, since the examination room at Northwestern Memorial, since Dr. Hargrove had pulled her chair closer to the table and folded her hands and said the words that no 30-year-old woman wants to hear, delivered in that particular tone of careful, practiced sympathy. Serena had sat very still while the doctor explained the specifics. Premature ovarian failure. Irreversible. The fertility treatments they'd attempted over the past 18 months had not been a solution. They'd been a delay. A very expensive, very painful delay that had finally run out of road. She'd driven home alone through the early snow. She hadn't called Grant. She hadn't known how to begin that conversation on a phone, with traffic around her and the wipers fighting wet flakes, and her hands barely functioning on the wheel. She told herself she would tell him in person. She told herself he would hold her. She had believed, with the particular stubborn faith of someone who has been trying very hard not to see something for a very long time, that her husband would come through. Grant Whitlock was standing at the kitchen island when she walked in, a glass of bourbon half-finished in his hand, his phone face down on the marble counter. He looked up. He read something in her face immediately. Not pain, not grief, but information. And his expression did not soften. It shifted, calculated. Like a man who had been waiting for a specific piece of news and had now received it. "The appointment," he said. Not a question. "Yeah." She put her keys on the hook by the door. Force of habit. Her coat was still on. She hadn't taken it off yet. Some part of her, some animal part working beneath the surface of conscious thought, had registered the temperature in the room and decided to stay dressed. "Can we sit down?" What did they say? She looked at him. The overhead light in the kitchen was bright and merciless, the kind of light that reveals every line and angle without flattery. Grant was 41, broad-shouldered, handsome in a corporate way that had always read to Serena as dependable. She had married that face 8 years ago. She had believed in the architecture of it. "They said it's not going to happen," she said, biologically. "They said the treatments aren't working, and they won't work. It's done, Grant. That part is done." He picked up his bourbon and drank. Set the glass down with a careful, precise click. "I see," he said. That was it. 2 words. No movement toward her, no hand on her shoulder, no pulling her close. He stood on the other side of the marble island like it was a conference table, and he looked at her the way a man looks at a spreadsheet that has just delivered a loss. "Grant." Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "Say something." He said something. He said quite a lot of things, actually, in a voice that was remarkably even for the content of what he was delivering. He told her he had known for months that this was the likely outcome. He told her he had been consulting with his attorney. He told her he had made certain arrangements. He told her, and this was the part that made the foyer feel suddenly very cold, very far from any version of reality she had built her adult life inside, he told her there were papers. He walked to the dining room table and came back with an envelope. "I had them drawn up in November," he said. "I was waiting to see if the last round of treatment would change things. It didn't." Serena looked at the envelope. She did not take it. "You had divorce papers drawn up," she said, "in November." Serena. That was 2 months ago. Her voice had gone flat in a way she didn't recognize. "We were still doing treatments. I was still going to appointments. You were driving me to some of those appointments. I was trying to be fair. I wanted to give it every chance. You were giving it a chance so you'd have documentation." The clarity of it arrived without warning, the way extreme cold sometimes clarifies. You wanted to be able to say you tried. Grant set the envelope on the marble floor in front of her. Not on the counter. On the floor. The gesture was small, but it was also enormous, and they both understood exactly what it meant. "I need a family," he said. "A real one. Children who carry my name. That's not a small thing, and I won't apologize for it. This was never going to work without—" "Get out of my way," she said. She walked past him. She went upstairs to the bedroom they had shared for 6 years. She sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her hands flat against her thighs and breathed in and out for approximately 4 minutes while she decided whether she was going to collapse or not. She decided she was not. She decided she was going to pack a bag and call her sister in Evanston and spend the night there and deal with all of it in the morning when the world was slightly less vertical. She packed 2 bags. Winter coat, extra. She opened the closet and reached for the second wool coat, the good one, the charcoal gray one she'd bought at a sample sale 3 winters ago. It wasn't there. She checked again. She went through the whole closet. She found her boots, her sweaters, her work clothes, all of it still present. Apparently not yet part of whatever arrangements Grant had been making since November, but the gray coat was gone, and she couldn't find her gloves, and by the time she came back downstairs with her 2 bags and her phone at 4% battery, Grant was standing at the front door. He had her luggage on the porch already, 2 rolling suitcases. He had gone through her things while she was upstairs. He had pulled out her larger bags and packed them himself, or had someone do it. She didn't know and couldn't tell, couldn't account for the time or the speed of it. The bags were on the porch in the snow, and Grant was standing at the door with his hand on the frame and his face very controlled and very final. "I think it's better if you go tonight," he said. "Grant, it's a blizzard. I'll call you a car." "You'll call me?" She stopped. She stared at him. She was looking for something in his face, some flinch of recognition, some acknowledgement that he understood what he was doing, that he, at minimum, understood this was not a civilized thing to do to a person on the worst day of her life. She found nothing. His eyes were flat and patient, the eyes of a man who has made a decision and is now simply waiting for the physical world to catch up to it. "My phone is almost dead." "There's a charger in the outer pocket of the blue bag." She picked up her bags. She didn't have a choice. She understood that now, standing in the foyer of the house she had helped design and furnish and maintain for 6 years. This was not her house. It had perhaps never been. She walked out the door, and the cold hit her like a wall, and Grant closed the door behind her, and she heard the deadbolt engage, and that sound, that small, mechanical, final sound, was the precise moment that 30 years of a certain kind of hoping ended. The porch light was on. She could see her breath. She pulled her bags to the end of the driveway and stood there in the snow, which was now falling with the kind of commitment that suggests it has been saving itself for exactly this occasion. She tried to call her sister. The phone showed 2%, connected, rang twice, and went black. Dead. She had the charger somewhere in the bag, but no way to use it without an outlet. And the nearest coffee shop that might still be open was 4 blocks away, and the wind chill was approaching dangerous. And she was standing on a residential street in a suburb of Chicago at 9 o'clock at night in a blizzard in a coat that was adequate for a walk to the car and nothing more. She started walking. She made it 3 blocks before the cold became serious. It was the particular kind of serious that moves from discomfort to threat without a clear dividing line. One moment her face was hurting and her fingers were numb, and the next she was aware, with some clinical detachment, that she was not going to make it much farther without shelter. The rolling suitcases were useless on the sidewalk, which hadn't been cleared, and she was dragging them through 4 inches of snow, and her arms were losing sensation, and her sense of direction was beginning to do something unreliable. The bus shelter appeared out of the white like a hallucination, a plastic and steel structure on the corner of Birchwood and Halsted. Its flickering interior light the only warm color visible in any direction. She got inside it. She left the suitcases half inside, half in the snow, because there wasn't enough room for everything. She sat on the metal bench and hunched forward and tried to generate heat by sheer intention. The bus route had been suspended. A notice on the shelter wall, printed on orange paper and laminated, announced that Route 72 service had been suspended for the duration of the winter storm advisory currently in effect. She read it 3 times before she fully understood it. No bus was coming. This was not a waiting place. This was just an accidental windbreak on a night when windbreaks were the difference between finding a way out and not finding one. Her fingers were clumsy now, difficult. She tried to open the blue bag to get to the charger, but the zipper required more coordination than she currently had. She managed the outer pocket after a long, stupid struggle and got the charger out, and then held it in her numb hands and understood that having a charger and having a power source were not the same thing, and she had confused them. She sat back. The wind screamed through the gap where the shelter's side panel had been cracked and never repaired. Snow came in at an angle across the bench. She pulled her knees up and made herself small and stared out at the street, which had become indistinguishable from everything around it. One flat, uniform, moving white field with no edges and no depth. She thought about Grant saying, "I'll call you a car," as if that were a reasonable response to what he had done. She thought about the sound of the deadbolt. She thought about Dr. Hargrove's folded hands, and the particular way she had said, "I'm so sorry, Serena." Not "I'm sorry for your diagnosis," but "I'm sorry, Serena," with her name in it, as if she could see something beyond the medical facts, some larger shape of a life that was getting very hard news all at once. She thought she might cry. She didn't. She was too cold for it. Crying requires a certain amount of available energy, and she didn't have any left. The lights appeared in the white without warning. Not street lights. These were driving lights, halogen, moving slow and deliberate through the snow from the east. Multiple sets. A convoy. She could see the shapes of large vehicles materializing out of the blizzard like something dredged up from depth. Black SUVs, heavy and armored, the kind that aren't sold at dealerships, moving in tight formation with maybe 30 feet between them and a focused precision that looked nothing like civilian driving in a storm. She watched them because there was nothing else to look at. They were slowing down. She noticed that before she could make sense of it, the formation was decelerating, brake lights flaring red through the snow, the whole column pulling toward the curb in a choreographed way that suggested whoever was coordinating this movement had made a decision. The lead vehicle stopped directly in front of the shelter. The second and third positioned themselves behind it. For a long moment, nothing happened. The engines ran. The headlights made a tunnel of falling snow. Then the passenger door of the lead SUV opened. The man who stepped out was large, maybe 6'2", wearing a suit that had no business being worn in a blizzard, dark, well-cut, completely inadequate for the weather, which he didn't seem to notice. He was maybe 40, lean in the face, with the particular quality of stillness that Serena would later come to understand meant he was reading every variable in an environment simultaneously. He walked to the shelter. Not a jog, not a cautious approach. He walked directly to it, like a man crossing a room he owns, and he crouched down to her eye level and looked at her for a moment without speaking. "Are you hurt?" he said. His voice was low and even, with a trace of something East Coast, New York, or New Jersey, worn down by years. Serena looked at him. Her teeth were chattering now with a violence that made it difficult to speak. No, I'm not hurt." "Your lips are white," he said. "The bus is—" She stopped, reorganized. "The bus route is suspended." "I know. How long have you been out here?" She tried to calculate it. She couldn't. "A while." He looked at the two suitcases. He looked at her coat, which was both wrong and insufficient. He looked at her phone, dead and useless in her hand. He didn't ask her any of the obvious questions: why she was here, where she was going, what had happened to get her to this particular corner on this particular night. He just took in the information and made a decision with a speed that would have been alarming in any other context. "Come with me," he said. I don't know you," she managed. The words were slightly ridiculous given the situation, but some functioning reflex had insisted on them. "No," he agreed. "You don't." He stood up and held out his hand. "But you have maybe another 40 minutes in this temperature before it gets serious, and I'm offering you a heated vehicle and a safe place for the night. That's the whole offer, nothing else." She looked at his hand. She looked out at the blizzard, which had not moderated at all, and showed no sign of doing so. She thought about the charger in her hand and the dead phone and the suspended bus route and the deadbolt sound. She took his hand. He helped her up and took both suitcases without a word, rolling them through the snow to the lead SUV with an ease that made them look weightless. He opened the rear door for her. She climbed in, and the heat inside was so immediate and so overwhelming that her whole body reacted to it at once. A full-body shudder that started at her core and moved outward, her hands beginning to burn, a sensation returned, her face aching with the thaw. The interior of the SUV smelled like leather and something faintly clean, cedar or sandalwood. The driver was a thick-necked man in his 50s who hadn't turned around. In the middle seat, separated from the front by a partition of tinted glass, a security type with a close-cropped beard was watching her with the careful, unrevealing eyes of a professional. And behind her, in the very rear, separated by another panel that had been partially lowered, 3 children. A small girl of maybe 7 with braided hair and enormous eyes was watching her with the focused intensity of someone who has just spotted something wonderful and cannot decide whether to speak first or simply stare. Beside her, a boy of perhaps 12 with headphones half on and a book open in his lap had gone very still. And against the far window, a teenage girl of 16 or so, all angles and caution, had her arms crossed and her face turned slightly away, observing without appearing to. The man who had helped her in sat down beside her and the door closed. "Marcus," he said to the security man, "we're going home." Marcus nodded once and relayed the order through an earpiece. The convoy began to move. "I'm Luca," the man beside her said. Not his last name, just the one. "You're safe." She believed him. She couldn't have explained why, especially later when she understood more about who he was. But in that moment, half frozen and stripped of everything that had defined her morning, she believed him completely. "Serena," she said. Her voice had steadied slightly as the warmth worked into her. "Serena Whitlock." From behind the lowered partition, the small girl's voice arrived with tremendous velocity. "Why were you sitting in the snow? Didn't you know it was dangerous? My name's Mila. I'm 7 3/4. That's almost 8. Did you know our car is bulletproof? Most cars aren't bulletproof, but ours is. Also, your hair has snowflakes in it, and they look really pretty." "Mila," the boy said flatly, "I'm just saying facts, Noah." "You're saying all of the facts at once." "That's how facts work." Luca glanced back at them with an expression that Serena couldn't quite categorize, exasperated and fond and tired all at once. A specific combination that she recognized as the face of a parent who has been managing a long day and is now managing its end. He said nothing. He looked back at the road ahead. The teenage girl, Arya, had turned fully toward the window now, but Serena caught it, a small, involuntary shift at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile, the ghost of one. Gone immediately, covered over with the practiced indifference of someone who has learned that showing things is dangerous. Serena pressed her thawing hands together in her lap and watched the city dissolve into suburbs as the convoy rolled north, and she tried to locate any solid feeling in herself and couldn't find one. She was empty in a way that didn't yet hurt. The hurt was coming, she knew, but for now she was just vacant, just stripped, sitting in a bulletproof car next to a man whose name she didn't fully know yet, being carried through a blizzard toward a destination she had zero information about, with 3 children in the back seat having an argument about the optimal way to deliver facts. She was 30 years old. This morning she had been a woman with a marriage and a medical plan and a next appointment. Now she had a dead phone and 2 suitcases and snowflakes in her hair. The convoy moved through the white. The DeSantis property revealed itself in stages, the way significant things often do. First the gate, iron and tall, and opened remotely by a guard in a booth who gave the lead SUV a brief, practiced wave. Then the long private drive, plowed recently but already gathering new accumulation. Then the trees falling back on either side. And then the house itself, which was not what Serena had expected, and was also, given what she was coming to understand about the man beside her, exactly what she should have expected. It was enormous. That was the first and bluntest fact. The kind of enormous that stops being about square footage and starts being about a philosophy, a statement that certain things cannot reach you here. Lake Michigan was visible beyond the north face of the property, a black and heaving dark below the snow-blurred sky. The mansion had 3 visible stories, wings extending in both directions from a central structure with high windows, security lighting that triggered as the convoy pulled up and lit everything in a cold white wash. There were cameras. There were 2 men at the entrance who were not decorative. And yet, The front door opened before the convoy fully stopped and warm light spilled out, and there was a woman in the doorway. Late 50s, heavy-set, with the authoritative bearing of someone who runs the actual operations of a household and knows it, and from behind her came the smell of something cooked, something with garlic and herbs. And Mila hit the SUV door before it was fully open and ran for the entrance shouting something about being starving, and Noah followed more carefully with his book still tucked under his arm, and Marcus, the security man, went ahead of everyone else to sweep the entry, all of it happening at once and in a practiced way that suggested this was simply the rhythm of returning home. Luca waited until the children were inside. Then he turned to Serena, who was still sitting in the vehicle trying to process the sheer scale of the transition she was in the middle of. "You need food and warmth," he said. "Inez will show you where you can sleep tonight. In the morning, when the storm clears, you can decide what you want to do next. You don't owe me anything. There are no strings here." "Why did you stop?" she said. He looked at her for a moment. His face in the cold light outside was harder to read than it had been in the warmth of the SUV. There were things in it, tiredness, and something older than tiredness, some long-carried weight she couldn't name yet. "Because I could," he said, "and because someone should have." He got out. He came around and opened her door and waited, and she stepped out into the cold with her numb legs and followed him toward the light. The woman in the doorway, Inez, took her in with a look that was both assessing and immediately warm, the look of a woman who has managed a complicated household for a long time and has seen most categories of unexpected arrival. She said, come in, you're frozen," and steered Serena toward a kitchen that was the size of a small restaurant and sat her down at a long wooden table and put a bowl of something in front of her without asking what she wanted. And Serena ate it because the smell of it was the first uncomplicated good thing that had happened in approximately 12 hours. Mila appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Are you staying?" she asked. "Just tonight," Serena said. Mila considered this with the gravity of a 7-year-old processing information that she suspects is incorrect. "Okay," she said, in a tone that made very clear she did not believe this for a moment. Noah appeared behind her, glasses slightly fogged from the temperature change, headphones now around his neck. He assessed the situation with a 12-year-old's careful, data-gathering gaze. "The spare room on the east wing has a better heater," he told Inez. "The one on the 3rd floor still has that radiator issue." "I know that," Inez said, "just noting it." "Noted." He withdrew. Mila stayed for another 30 seconds, making intense and unsubtle eye contact with Serena, and then was called away by Inez with the particular tone of a woman who means it. Luca did not come to the kitchen. Serena ate alone, or nearly alone. Inez moved around the space with efficient quiet, cleaning up the dinner service, and the warmth and the food and the sheer abrupt safety of the place worked on Serena with a thoroughness she couldn't resist. By the time Inez led her upstairs to the East Wing guest room, she could barely hold her eyes open. The room was large and spare and clean. A window looked out over the back lawn toward the lake, though the lake was invisible now. Nothing out there but dark and driving snow. Serena sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her 2 suitcases, which had appeared in the room without her having carried them up. And she thought about Grant's face when he had set the envelope on the floor, and she thought about the deadbolt, and she thought about that doctor's voice saying Serena with her name in it. She didn't cry. She was still too far past it for crying. She lay down in her clothes and pulled the comforter over herself and stared at the ceiling and listened to the storm against the windows. Somewhere in the house, she could hear Mila's voice, high and fast, the words indistinct but the energy unmistakable, and the lower rumble of Luca's response, and the house settling around those sounds like something that had always been here. She closed her eyes. She thought, one night, I'll be gone in the morning. She believed it the same way she had believed for 8 years that Grant Whitlock had a warmth in him that she simply needed to find the right way to reach. Somewhere below her, a door closed. The storm pressed against the glass, and in a mansion on the edge of a frozen lake, a woman who had been cast out into the cold lay in a borrowed bed and didn't yet know that the life she had been trying to protect all day was already gone, and that the one beginning to form around her was nothing she would have been able to imagine in the light of any ordinary morning. The radiator in the East Wing room clicked and hummed. Heat moved through the pipes. Outside, the blizzard howled. Inside, for the first time in longer than she could account for, Serena Whitlock was warm. But at 4 in the morning, while the house slept, a set of headlights appeared at the foot of the private drive. A single vehicle, not armored, not part of any convoy. It idled there in the dark for 3 minutes before the gate camera triggered, and the guards registered its presence, and it drove away. It would be back. The vehicle came back at 7:15 in the morning. Serena didn't know that yet. She was standing in the East Wing bathroom with her hands braced on either side of the sink, looking at her face in the mirror with the particular disorientation of someone who has slept in a strange place and woken to find the strangeness unchanged. Her eyes were swollen, not from crying, she still hadn't managed that, but from the specific exhaustion of a body that had gone through too much cold and too much shock and had not fully recovered overnight. She looked older than 30. She looked like someone who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had finally set it down, only to find that her arms still held the shape of it. She splashed water on her face. She found a folded towel on the rack that had not been there the night before. Someone had come in while she slept, or early this morning, and left a towel and a wrapped bar of soap and a new toothbrush still in its packaging. She stood there holding the toothbrush for a moment longer than necessary, because the smallness of the gesture was somehow more destabilizing than the mansion itself. She's dressed in yesterday's clothes. She didn't know where her bags were. They'd been in the room when she fell asleep, but she couldn't find them now, and she decided not to look, because looking would require more decision-making than she currently had capacity for, and what she needed first was a phone charger and then a plan, and then somewhere further down the list, the rest of her life. The house was already awake. She could hear it before she found it, the velocity of Mila's voice carrying through 2 floors and a hallway, and beneath that the lower register of a morning that had been in motion for a while. She followed the smell of coffee down the main staircase and through a wide hallway lined with framed photographs. Landscapes, mostly, a few architectural shots, nothing personal, nothing that would tell a stranger anything about the people who lived here. And into the kitchen. Mila was at the table in a school uniform that she was wearing incorrectly, the collar turned up on one side, and the sash of her skirt tied in a bow that suggested creativity over accuracy. She was eating toast with the focus of someone who is simultaneously conducting 3 internal conversations and losing track of all of them. Noah sat across from her with a tablet propped against the fruit bowl, reading something, his cereal going untouched and slowly soggy. Inez was at the stove. Arya was not there. Luca was at the far end of the kitchen island with a coffee cup and his phone, dressed for work, or for whatever it was that required him to be in a suit at 7 in the morning, and he was reading something on the phone with the focused stillness of a man who compartmentalizes very efficiently. He looked up when Serena came in. "Coffee," he said. Not a question, not an offer exactly, more a statement of what was about to happen. "Please," she said. Mila's head came up instantly. "You're still here," she said, with the triumphant satisfaction of someone whose hypothesis has been confirmed. "I told you last night, you said one night, and it's morning, so technically you're still here, which means I was right." Mila looked at Noah. "I was right." "You're always right," Noah said, without looking up from his tablet, in the tone of someone who has found the most efficient response to a recurring situation. Inez set a coffee cup in front of the stool nearest Serena. Serena sat. The coffee was strong and dark, and she wrapped both hands around the cup and felt something in her chest begin to unknot by a degree. Luca set his phone down. "The storm cleared around 5, he said. "Roads are being plowed. By mid-morning, you should be able to get somewhere." "I need to make some calls," she said. "My phone? Charging. Inez has it." Inez produced the phone from a drawer and set it on the counter. 15%. Enough. "Thank you," Serena said. To Inez, and to the room, and to none of them specifically. She picked up the phone and saw 11 missed calls. 3 from her sister Claire, 2 from a number she didn't recognize, and 6 from Grant. Not last night. This morning. Starting at 6:45, 15 minutes apart, precise and escalating, the pattern of a man who is accustomed to being answered. She turned the phone face down on the counter. Luca watched her do it. He didn't say anything. "Daddy, Serena's phone is blowing up," Mila announced. "Eat your toast." "I'm just observing." "Observe quietly." Mila ate her toast with exaggerated silence, her eyes moving between Luca and Serena with the calculation of a child who is building a theory and collecting evidence. Serena drank her coffee and stared at the window above the sink. The snow had stopped. In the morning light, the backyard was white and still and vast. The lake beyond it, a flat gray that matched the sky exactly, horizon invisible. It was the kind of landscape that made a person feel very small, and she was already feeling small enough. She called Claire from the kitchen table while Mila watched her openly, and Noah pretended not to. Claire answered on the first ring. "Oh my God, Serena, where are you? Grant called me last night. He said..." "What did he say?" A pause. "He said you left. He said you were upset about the appointment and you just left. He said he was worried." Serena let that sit for a second. She looked at the kitchen counter and breathed through her nose. "He put my bags on the porch," she said quietly, "during a blizzard, and locked the door." Silence on the other end. "Claire, Claire's voice had gone careful. Okay. Where are you now? Are you safe?" "I'm safe. I'm somewhere safe. I need a place to stay for a few days while I figure this out." "Yes. Obviously, yes. Come here, Serena. I'll come today. I have some things to sort out first. I'll call you in an hour." She hung up. She sat for a moment with the phone in her hand, and then she turned it over and looked at Grant's missed calls and felt nothing. Not anger yet, not grief. Something more like the absence of everything. The emptiness left behind when a structure collapses, and the dust hasn't settled enough yet to see the shape of the damage. Luca had moved to the other side of the kitchen. He was talking in a low voice to Marcus, who had materialized in the doorway with the practiced invisibility of a man paid to be present but unobtrusive. Whatever they were discussing, it was short, and it ended with Luca setting his coffee cup down with a deliberate click, and his expression doing something that Serena caught from the corner of her eye, a tightening, brief, and controlled before it was covered over. Marcus left. Luca came back to the island. He looked at Serena. "Someone was at the gate this morning," he said. "Early?" She frowned. "What kind of someone?" "A car. No plates we could read. It left when our team logged it." His voice was level, informational. But there was something underneath it that Serena's recently recalibrated threat detection was beginning to recognize. "You said your husband's name was Grant." "I didn't say his name." A beat. "No," he agreed. "You didn't. My apologies." He didn't look apologetic. He looked like a man who had already gathered the information elsewhere and was being courteous about the method. "Do you have reason to think he'd come looking for you?" She thought about the 6 calls starting at 6:45, the precision of them, the fact that he'd already called Claire and built a narrative, but she left, she was upset, I was worried, before Serena had woken up. Grant Whitlock did not leave things uncontrolled. He did not leave narrative threads untied. "Yes," she said, "I think he would." Something moved through the kitchen then. A shift in atmosphere, barely perceptible, the kind of thing you only notice if you're paying attention to the quality of silence rather than the noise. Noah looked up from his tablet. Mila had stopped eating. Even the sounds from the stove had paused. Luca said nothing. He picked up his coffee and drank the rest of it and set the cup in the sink and said, to the room in general, "Noah, bus in 20 minutes. Mila, your caller." The morning resumed, but something had changed in it. Serena could feel it the way you feel a change in air pressure. Not dramatic, not announced, just present, a new weight in things that hadn't been there a minute ago. She spent the next 2 hours in the East Wing guest room with her phone. She called the attorney her friend Maya had recommended 8 months ago when Serena had first privately begun to suspect that her marriage was heading somewhere she didn't want to follow. She left a message. She called her bank and confirmed that the joint account had not yet been touched. That would change, she knew, and soon. She found her charger in the blue bag, which had been set neatly in the room's closet, and she plugged in properly and sat on the edge of the bed and made a list on the Notes app of everything she needed to do in the next 72 hours. She was on the 4th item when the knock came. It was light, tentative, not Inez's knock. Inez knocked like a person with a schedule to maintain. This was something different. "Come in," Serena said. The door opened 2 inches and stopped. Then slowly, Arya appeared in the gap. She was in her school uniform too. the same as Mila's, but worn with the precision of someone for whom presentation is a form of control. 16 years old, and carrying herself like someone who has learned to take up exactly as much space as necessary and no more. Her hair was pulled back tightly. Her face was carefully neutral in the way that is itself a form of expression. She didn't come in. She stood in the doorway. "Inez said you might need a sweater," she said. Her voice was flat. "There are some in the hall closet. From before." A pause. "They might not fit right, but they're clean." Serena looked at her. "Thank you, Arya." The name landed. Something in Arya's face shifted just slightly. A microsecond of surprise at being named, at being seen, before the neutral mask reasserted itself. "It's just clothes," Arya said. It's not a thing." "Okay." Arya looked at the 2 suitcases in the corner. She looked at Serena's notes app, visible on the phone. She looked at the window. "Are you leaving today?" she asked. Still flat, still careful. "I'm planning to get to my sister's place." "Right." Arya nodded. One precise nod. "That makes sense." Another pause. "Mila thinks you're staying." "I know. She does that. Gets attached." There was something in her voice, not criticism of Mila, not quite. Something more like a warning, or a map of damage. "It's not her fault, she's 7. "It's not a fault," Serena said. Arya looked at her directly for the first time. Her eyes were dark and assessing and held the specific wariness of someone who has had hope used against her. "She'll be fine," Arya said. "She always is. It takes her a while to recalibrate." She said recalibrate with the slightly self-conscious precision of someone who reads above their grade level and is not entirely sure when to deploy it. "What about you?" Serena asked. The question landed wrong, or not wrong exactly, but unexpectedly, and Arya's whole posture did something in response to it, a small recoil, very controlled. "I'm fine," she said. "I didn't say you weren't." A long pause. The hallway behind Arya was quiet. The children had gone to school, Luca had left for wherever Luca went in the mornings. The house had a different quality now, larger and more still. "The sweaters are in the second closet on the left," Arya said finally, and she pulled the door back to the 2-inch gap and then closed it completely, and Serena heard her footsteps retreating down the hall with the careful evenness of someone who has learned not to run. Serena sat there for a moment. Then she put her phone down and pressed her palms flat on her knees and stared at the door. She thought, "I should go. I should get in a cab and go to Claire's and start the actual work of what comes next. This is not my house. These are not my people. This man does not know me, and I do not know him, and whatever small temporary kindness brought me here last night has run its course." She thought all of that with complete clarity. She did not move. By noon, when she had finally organized herself enough to call a car, Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway where she was finishing a second coffee and said, quietly and without visible emotion, that there had been an incident at the gate. Not the car from this morning. A different car. This one had stopped, and a man had gotten out, and he had stood at the gate and taken photographs of the property with his phone, and when the guard had approached and asked him to move along, he had said, again, Marcus's voice carried zero inflection on this, that he was trying to locate his wife. Serena set her coffee cup down. "He said wife," she said. "Yes. We're separated. The divorce papers were drawn up in November." "He said wife," Marcus repeated, with the patience of a man who is reporting facts and not adjudicating them. She called Grant back. She had been avoiding it, but now she called, and he answered on the first ring, which meant he had been waiting, and the quality of his waiting was present in his voice when he said her name, Serena. In that particular way he had, smooth on the surface and something serrated just underneath. "You need to come home," he said. Before she could speak, preemptively, like a move in a game she hadn't agreed to play. "I'm not coming home, Grant. You're in a dangerous situation and you don't understand. I'm fine. You're in Luca DeSantis's house." The name landed with the specific weight of a thing he'd researched. "Do you understand who that is? Do you have any idea what he's involved in? He helped me during a blizzard. That's the whole story." "That's not..." "Serena, that's not a story. That's a beginning of a story that ends very badly for you. Come home." We can discuss the papers. We can... You put my bags on the porch, she said, during a blizzard, after the worst day of my life. And you locked the door. Her voice was completely steady. She had found the bottom of something and was standing on it. There is no coming home. That's done. Don't come to this property again. She hung up. She sat in the kitchen for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone and canceled the car she had ordered. She wasn't sure, even later, when she tried to reconstruct the logic of it, exactly why she'd done it. It wasn't fear of Grant, or not only that. It wasn't the warmth of the house, or Inez's cooking, or the orphaned sweaters in the hall closet. It was something more structural, a recognition, almost involuntary, that she had nowhere to go that felt more real than here, and sometimes that is enough. The afternoon went sideways in a way no one could have planned for. Luca came home at 3, earlier than Serena expected, and he came in with Marcus at his shoulder and his jaw set in a way that was clearly different from his morning departure. He went directly to his study, which was off the main hallway, and the door closed, and Serena heard voices. 2 of them, Luca's and another man's she didn't recognize, the words indistinct but the cadence of the conversation unmistakably tense. She was in the living room with a book she wasn't reading when Arya came home from school and dropped her bag in the hallway and stood in the doorway of the living room and looked at Serena with an expression that had revised itself since morning. "You didn't leave," Arya said. "Not yet." Arya looked at the closed study door down the hallway. She looked back at Serena. She set her jaw in a way that was so precisely the same as Luca's that Serena nearly said something about it. "Grant Whitlock," Arya said. "Is that your husband's name?" Serena went still. "How do you know that name?" "I heard Marcus say it to my dad." Arya crossed her arms. She was doing the controlled space thing again, making herself small and deliberate. "He ran a check." "A check. That's what they do. When someone comes to the house, anyone who has contact with any of us." She said it without apology, without embarrassment. Matter of fact, the way you describe the security routine that has been your entire life. "Your husband has a lawyer named Patrick Voss. He filed a report this morning with the 4th District claiming you were removed from your residence against your will." The air in the room changed. "He what?" Serena said. "He filed a report. It's not an arrest. It's not formal charges. It's a record. My dad's lawyer's already on it." Arya's voice stayed flat, but her eyes were doing something else, something older and more complicated. "He's trying to make you look like a victim of the house instead of what you actually are." "What am I actually?" "Someone he threw out and wants back so he can control how the story gets told." Arya said it simply, without drama, the way you say the thing everyone already knows. "It's a power move. I've seen them before." Serena stared at her. "You're 16, she said. "I've lived in 3 foster homes and 2 group residences, and I've been here 4 years, Arya said. "I know what a power move looks like." The study door opened. Luca came out, and behind him a broad man in a gray suit who gave Serena a brief, assessing nod and moved to the door and let himself out. Luca stood in the hallway. He looked at Serena and then at Arya, and something in his face shifted when he saw them together. Something careful and involuntary. "Arya," he said, "go do your homework." "I'm helping." "You're eavesdropping and then presenting conclusions as help." "Same thing." "It's not the same." He stopped, pressed 2 fingers to his temple briefly. "Please." Arya went. She went with her chin up and her arms still crossed, and she didn't hurry, but she went. Luca leaned against the hallway wall. He looked at Serena. "Your husband filed a false report," he said. "My attorney has already begun the process of addressing it. But," he paused, "it means he's not going away quietly." "No," she said. "He never does. He's going to make this about me," Luca said. "About what I do. What I've done." His voice was completely level, but she could hear the thing underneath it. The weight of a man who has had his name used against him enough times to be tired of the specific mechanics of it. "If you're here when that narrative lands, it lands on you too." She looked at him. "Is that your way of telling me to leave?" "It's my way of telling you the full picture." "I know the full picture," she said. "Grant told me you were dangerous about 30 seconds after he found out where I was. Which means he did the research this morning. Which means the first thing he did when he woke up, before calling my sister, before filing any report, was figure out exactly who had helped me, so he could use it. She paused. He's not worried about me. He's worried about losing the ending of the story. Luca watched her. I'm not afraid of him, she said. I should probably clarify. I'm not staying because I'm afraid to go. I canceled the car because... She stopped. Because why, exactly? She still couldn't articulate it completely. Because Arya told me something this morning that I'm still thinking about. What did she tell you? That Mila gets attached and it takes her a while to recalibrate. Serena looked at her hands. She was warning me off. She was doing it quietly, with sweaters, but she was doing it. And a 16-year-old who manages her own attachment that carefully. She stopped again. Luca was very still. I'm a stranger, Serena said. I know that. I'm not making a claim here. I just... She looked up. Where is their mother? The question arrived in the room and stayed there. Luca's face did something she hadn't seen it do yet. Not closed, not guarded, but briefly, genuinely open. Like a room with the light on for exactly 1 second before the door shuts. She died, he said. 4 years ago. Flat, factual. The tone of a man who has learned that the only safe way to say a thing is to say it completely without inflection. A car. A targeted car. On a Tuesday evening in October. Mila was 3. She doesn't remember it clearly anymore, which is... He stopped. Noah does. Arya was already with us by then. She'd been placed 8 months before. She remembers everything. Serena said nothing. There was nothing to say that was adequate, and she knew enough about grief to know that filling silence with inadequate words was a form of selfishness. The children weren't in the car, Luca said. In case you're... They weren't in the car. I wasn't going to ask that. Most people do. He pushed off the wall. Eventually, he moved toward the kitchen. He stopped in the hallway and looked back. There's enough food for 4, if you want to stay for dinner. He said it with the same quality he'd had last night in the SUV. Not warmth exactly, but a kind of precise and deliberate honesty. A here is the offer, no more and no less than what it is. Serena sat in the living room for a while after he left. The house ticked around her. Somewhere upstairs she could hear Mila arriving home. The door, the thud of a bag, the immediate vocalization, Inez's voice in response, and the ordinary percussion of a household doing the work of a late afternoon. She picked up her phone. She had a text from Claire. Call me when you can. I'm here. She had a voicemail from the attorney. She had 2 new calls from Grant, ignored. And she had a notification from a local news aggregator app she'd forgotten she had. An alert triggered by a name, a feature she'd set up months ago when she'd started privately, carefully, building the file on her marriage that she'd hoped she wouldn't need. The alert was a small item in the Tribune's digital sidebar. A quote from an unnamed source speaking about an ongoing investigation into organized crime connections in the Northern Lake District. The quote named no one directly, but at the bottom of the item, in the way of these things, there was a photograph. Taken today, the timestamp read, outside the gate of a private property on the lake. The photograph showed the front of the DeSantis property, and standing at the edge of the frame, barely visible, a figure in a dark coat looking at the gate. Serena enlarged the image with 2 fingers. Her heart had begun doing something slow and unpleasant. The figure was too distant to identify with certainty, but the coat was the charcoal gray one, the good one, from the sample sale 3 winters ago, the one that had been missing from the closet last night when she'd packed her bag. She sat there with the phone in her hand and the image on the screen, and the realization working through her with the cold, systematic thoroughness of something that changes the shape of everything. The coat was charcoal gray. Serena stared at the image on her phone until her eyes went dry and she had to blink. She enlarged it again, fingers clumsy on the screen. The figure was at the edge of the frame, partially obscured by the gatepost, but the coat was unmistakable. The particular cut of it, the way it fell at the hip, the collar she had turned up 100 times against Chicago wind. She had owned that coat for 3 years. She knew its shape the way you know the shape of something you've worn through every hard season. Grant was wearing her coat. She sat with that for a long moment, turning it over, looking for another explanation. There wasn't one. He had packed her bags himself, or had someone do it. And he had kept the coat. Not forgotten it, kept it. And then this morning, while she was eating Inez's cooking and listening to Mila recalibrate her worldview in real time, Grant had driven to this address in her coat and stood at the gate and taken photographs and let himself be seen. It was a message. She understood that with the cold clarity of someone who has spent 8 years learning the grammar of a particular kind of control. He was telling her he could find her. He was telling her he still held pieces of her. He was standing at the gate in her coat like a man who wanted to make sure she knew he had it. She went to find Luca. He was in the kitchen, standing at the island with a glass of water and his phone, and when she came in, she held out her phone without speaking and showed him the image. He looked at it. He said nothing for a moment. Then he set his water down and took her phone and enlarged the image the same way she had, and his face did the tightening thing she'd seen that morning, and then went very still. "When was this taken?" he said. "The timestamp says 2:40 this afternoon. We logged a vehicle at the gate at 2:50. He set her phone on the counter. 10 minutes after this photo was published. "He wanted you to find it," she said. "He wanted me to find it. He sent it to the Tribune's tip line and then drove back to confirm we'd seen it." Luca looked at her. "Your husband is escalating." "My almost ex-husband. That distinction doesn't change the behavior." "No," she said. "It doesn't." Marcus appeared in the doorway. He had the quality of a man who is always approximately 12 seconds from wherever he is needed, and Serena had stopped being unsettled by it and started being grateful for it, which was its own kind of information about how quickly her baseline had shifted. "Voss filed an amended report," Marcus said. He was looking at Luca, not at Serena, but he made no pretense that the information wasn't for both of them. "Upgraded the claim, now alleging Ms. Whitlock is being held under duress and has been prevented from contacting family." The room was very quiet. "He called my sister this morning," Serena said. "He called her before I did, before I even woke up." She heard her own voice and recognized the quality of it. Very level, very deliberate. The voice she used when she needed to not feel the full weight of something yet. "He was building the record before I had a chance to build mine. Patrick Voss is good at that," Luca said. There was something in the way he said the name. Not anger, but recognition. The tone of a man who has encountered a specific instrument of harm before and knows its capabilities. He was involved in a case 2 years ago. Different context, same methods. Serena looked at him. "You know Voss." "I know of him." A pause. "He works for people who want to use law as a weapon without getting their hands on the weapon themselves. He's very careful about that distinction." Luca picked up his phone and made a call. He turned slightly away from her while it connected, and she heard him say, quietly, the name of his attorney, Rice, and a set of instructions delivered with the compressed efficiency of a man who speaks this language fluently and has for a long time. When he hung up, he turned back. "Rice will file responses first thing tomorrow. Tonight, my security team will document everything. The car this morning, the photographs, the amended report. We build a counter record." He looked at her directly. "But Serena, this is going to get louder before it gets quiet." She held his gaze. "I know. The children—" "I know," she said again, softer this time. "If my being here is going to pull attention toward your family, I should go. I understand that." He was quiet for a moment. He was looking at her the way he had in the SUV, that reading variables quality, except now there was something slightly different in it. Less assessment, more something she couldn't name yet. "I'm not asking you to go," he said. She didn't say anything. "I'm telling you the conditions," he said, "so you can decide with full information, that's all." She decided in the approximately 4 seconds it took Mila to come thundering down the stairs and into the kitchen, demanding to know if there was any of Inez's soup left, and the answer was yes. And Mila pulled herself up onto the counter stool with the confidence of someone who has never once considered that she might not be welcome exactly where she is, and she looked at Serena and said with total guileless certainty, "You should sit here for dinner. This is the best stool. I usually sit here, but I'm letting you." "That's very generous," Serena said. "I know," Mila agreed. Serena sat on the stool. She stayed. The next 3 days were almost ordinary, and that was the thing that undid her. Not the crisis, but the ordinary. The rhythm of a household with children is specific and relentless and deeply human, and it turned out that Serena Whitlock, who had spent 18 months and a significant amount of emotional capital trying to engineer a particular version of family, had a capacity for this specific rhythm that she hadn't known was in her until it was suddenly being used. She helped Noah with the history project on Tuesday evening, sitting at the kitchen table while Mila drew elaborate and anatomically questionable horses on graph paper beside them. And at some point, she and Noah had been talking for 40 minutes about the post-war period, and she hadn't noticed the time passing, which was the first time she hadn't noticed the time passing in weeks. Noah had a precise lateral intelligence. He approached problems from the side, came in at angles, made connections that weren't obvious, and then made them seem inevitable. He reminded her, in certain lights, of herself at 12, which was a thought she didn't examine too closely. Arya was harder. Arya came and went with the careful autonomy of someone who has learned to be self-sufficient as a survival mechanism and is not sure, even now, even in a safe place, that relying on that mechanism is wrong. She spoke to Serena when Serena was present, answered questions with full sentences and actual content, occasionally offered information voluntarily, a book recommendation on Wednesday morning, a precise and unsolicited critique of the documentary Mila insisted on watching Thursday night. But she kept a perimeter, and Serena kept back from it, and they existed in a functional parallel that both of them understood without discussing. Luca was different every time she encountered him, which was itself a kind of consistency. He was formal in the mornings, preoccupied and calibrated, moving through the house on the way to somewhere with the focus of a man who has a great many moving parts to manage. He was quieter in the evenings, slower, the suit jacket gone, and the quality of him changed in a way that suggested the house itself did something to him, returned him to himself, or to whatever version of himself existed before the armor of the profession. He didn't talk to her much, but he was present in a way that was different from the performing of presence, and she found herself aware of it with a specificity she tried not to examine. On Thursday evening, she was standing at the kitchen counter trying to figure out the coffee machine, a device of such aggressive sophistication that it appeared to require a degree to operate, when Luca came in and reached past her without a word, and pressed 2 buttons in sequence, and the machine began producing coffee with insulting ease. "There's a trick to it," he said. "There shouldn't be a trick. It should just make coffee." "I know." It was a gift. She looked at him. He was standing close, not inappropriately, just the proximity of a small shared task. And he looked faintly amused, which was a different quality than she'd seen in his face before. Lighter, and she thought, there you are. There's the one underneath all the others. Then her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. She answered it because she'd been answering all unknown numbers for 3 days, building the record, covering every angle. The voice on the other end was a woman's, crisp, professional, with the particular cadence of a journalist who has learned that the first 15 seconds of a call determine whether the door stays open. "Ms. Whitlock? My name is Dana Reyes. I'm with the Tribune. I'm writing a piece on the investigation into organized crime operations in the Northern Lake District, and I'd like to offer you the chance to share your account before we go to press." Serena's whole body went cold. "What investigation?" she said, though she already knew. "The 4th District investigation, triggered by a report filed by your husband's attorney. Ms. Whitlock, I want to be clear. We're going to press with or without your statement, but my editor feels you deserve—" "Who is your source?" Serena said. A beat. "I'm not in a position—" "Your source is Patrick Voss or someone Voss sent to you. The report is fabricated. I was not held against my will. I came here voluntarily after my husband locked me out of our house during a blizzard." Her voice was steady, and she was going to keep it that way. "If you publish a story based on a false police report without verifying the source's credibility, that's a different kind of story." Another beat, longer. "Ms. Whitlock, I have photographs." "I know. He took them himself and sent them to your tip line." Silence. "Do you have documentation of that?" Reyes asked. The journalist's voice had shifted, less scripted, more interested. The story had just changed shape on her. "My attorney is building a file. If you want to wait 24 hours before publishing, you'll have a better story." Serena paused. "A real one." She hung up. Her hand was shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of having moved fast when she needed to and finding out she still could. Luca was watching her. The coffee machine had finished its work and neither of them had touched it. "That was the Tribune," she said. "I heard. They have photographs and a source. Voss." She set the phone on the counter. "They're going to run something. Maybe we bought a day, maybe not." Luca was quiet for a moment, then, "What's your attorney's timeline on the counter filing?" "Tomorrow morning." Rice will coordinate with him tonight. He picked up both coffee cups and handed her one. His face had gone back to the day face, controlled, forward-looking, already several steps ahead of the current moment. But something of the other version, the lighter one, was still faintly present around the edges. You handled that well. I've had 8 years of practice reading his moves, she said. That should get easier once it's over. Does it? She said. Not challenging, genuinely asking. Asking the man who had lost something much larger than a marriage. He looked at her over the rim of his coffee cup. Some of it does, he said. The story ran the next morning. Not in the Tribune, they'd held it. Reyes was being careful, or her editor was, or the file Rice had sent over at midnight had given them enough pause. But something else ran, a smaller outlet, an aggregator with a political bent and a history of running items that larger organizations were too cautious to touch. The piece was 8 paragraphs. It named Luca DeSantis. It referenced the 4th District report. It used the word alleged 5 times as if repetition made it responsible, and it included one of the photographs from outside the gate. Not the one Serena had found, a different one, taken from a slightly different angle, one she had not seen before. In this photograph, the second one, the gate was open, and visible through it, partially obscured but identifiable, was a child. Mila, in her school uniform, being walked to the SUV by Inez on a Tuesday morning. Her face was not blurred. Her name was not used. The piece didn't name the children. But she was there, visible and real and small. And she was in a photograph that had been taken by a man standing outside the gate with a long lens and deliberate patience. Luca saw the article at 6:45 in the morning. Serena knew this because she heard, from the guest room, through 2 walls, the sound of a door closing with a force that was not quite a slam, but was also not a normal door closing. And then silence. The particular silence of a very controlled person staying very controlled under conditions that make control very difficult. She found him in the study. He was standing at the window. His back was to the door. He said without turning, "The children don't know yet." "Okay," she said. "Mila can't see it. Not today. Maybe not at all, depending on how fast it moves." He turned. His face was... She had not seen this face before, and she thought she was probably seeing something very few people had ever been allowed to see. Not anger, though anger was present. Something underneath it. Something raw and more fundamental. A father's specific, annihilating terror. She's 7 years old. She was walking to school. He took a photograph of her walking to school. "I know. My wife..." He stopped. He put one hand flat on the desk and looked at it. When Elena died, the people responsible used her routine. They knew when she would be where. They watched. They waited. He lifted his eyes. "And now there is a man with a long lens standing outside my gate, watching my daughter walk to school." Serena's throat tightened. "Grant is not a criminal," she said carefully. "He's vindictive, and he's running a narrative campaign, and he has a corrupt attorney. He's not..." "He hired someone," Luca said. "That photograph was not taken by a man standing at a gate. The angle, the focal length. That was someone positioned above street level. Across the street, 2nd floor. That's not Grant Whitlock standing in your coat. That's a professional photographer he hired." She hadn't thought of that. She should have thought of that. "He escalated," she said. "Yes. This is about the divorce," she said, though even as she said it, she could hear the inadequacy of it. "He wants leverage. He needs to be the one who controls the ending. This is how he does that. He manufactures a crisis, so I come back to manage it. And when I come back, he has the position of power." "I understand the logic," Luca said, "but the photograph of my daughter is published. That is not a negotiating position anymore. That is a fact that exists in the world." He moved to the desk and sat. He picked up his phone and called Rice, and Serena heard the conversation, short, direct, 2 minutes. And when he hung up, the set of his shoulders had changed. Not softer. Something else. Resolved. The specific quality of a man who has stopped assessing and started deciding. "Reese is filing an emergency motion this morning," he said. "Harassment, targeted surveillance, child endangerment provisions. We're going after the photographer's identification through the outlet. They'll fight it, but we'll get it, and when we do, we trace it back to Voss." He looked at her. "This is going to get significantly worse before it gets better. You understand that?" She nodded. Child Protective Services will receive a report, he said. Probably today, maybe tomorrow. It's Voss's next move. The article creates public concern. A report follows as a natural consequence. An investigation opens, and suddenly my household is under official scrutiny. That's the strategy. His voice was completely flat delivering this. Factual. But his hands on the desk were pressed very hard against the surface. When an investigation opens, the children are interviewed. Mila, Noah, Arya. The last name landed differently than the others. Serena watched his face when he said it. Arya's been through that before, he said. Foster system interviews, CPS visits. She knows how those rooms feel. He paused. She has not been in one of those rooms since she came here. Serena sat down across from him. She put her hands on the desk and looked at him directly and said, "Then we make sure the investigation closes before it gets near her. That is not entirely within our control. Some of it is." She was thinking fast, the way she'd thought fast on the phone with Reyes, finding the angles coming in from the side. The report Grant filed says I was removed from our residence against my will. I can walk into the 4th District today and make a statement that directly contradicts that account. On the record. Full detail. The blizzard, the locked door, the divorce papers, the choice to accept assistance voluntarily. She looked at him. And I can provide documentation. I have texts from that night. I have the voicemail Grant left me at 6:45 in the morning, the one where he says, "Come home," before I've even told anyone where I am, which means he already knew, which means he was already tracking me. Luca was watching her. He used my location sharing, she said. The realization had just arrived, cold and specific. We never turned it off. When I left the house, I still had location sharing on with his phone. He knew where I was when I stopped moving. He knew I was at that bus shelter. She stood up. He sent the convoy location. He sent you the location. The silence in the room changed. Luca's face had gone very still. Is that possible? She said. The question was partly to herself, partly to him. Is it possible he found out you were returning that night? A route? A timeline? And he positioned me there? That would require knowing my route, Luca said, slowly. He knew where I was. He had my location, and he had a coat that was supposed to be in my bag. She looked at her hands. What if he didn't forget to put it in my bag? What if he kept it so I'd be colder faster, so I'd be in worse shape when— Stop, Luca said. She stopped. That is a very large conclusion, he said. I know. If it's correct— He stopped. His jaw was tight. If it's correct, then this started before the blizzard, before the divorce papers, before any of this week. He stood up. Marcus. Marcus was in the doorway in 12 seconds. I need everything we have on Grant Whitlock, Luca said. Financial records, public filings, professional associations, and I need to know who in my organization has a root leak. Marcus's face did not change. Yes, he said, and he was gone. Serena stood in the study and felt the floor tilt slightly beneath her. Not physically, but in the way of someone who has just understood that the shape of a story they thought they knew is completely different from the shape it actually has. She had come here as an accident, a woman in a bus shelter in a blizzard, a coincidence, a small human accident that a man with a habit of kindness had stopped a car for. But if Grant had her location, if Grant had known the route, if Grant had engineered the meeting, not the divorce, not the cruelty, those were real, those were his, but the specific geography of her rescue, then she had not arrived here by accident. She had been delivered. And the man who had delivered her was standing outside the gate in her coat, taking photographs of Luca's 7-year-old daughter, and the question she could not yet answer, the one that was beginning to press against the inside of her chest with the particular weight of something that changes everything it touches, was what exactly Grant Whitlock had wanted to happen when she had been delivered. The word sat in her chest like a stone and she couldn't move it. She stood in the study while Luca made 3 more calls in rapid succession, his voice low and clipped and utterly controlled, and she tried to reconstruct every moment from the night of the blizzard backward, the packed bags, the charcoal coat pulled from the closet before she came downstairs, the deadbolt sound, the specific timing of all of it. And the more she reconstructed, the more the geometry of it revealed itself as something other than cruelty. Cruelty had been the surface. Underneath it was architecture. Grant had planned the eviction down to the temperature. The thought arrived with a physical sensation. Something between nausea and vertigo, the specific bodily response to understanding that you have been a piece moved on a board rather than a person making choices. She pressed one hand flat against the study wall and breathed through her nose and waited for her vision to steady. Luca finished the last call. He set the phone down and looked at her. He could see what was happening in her face, and he didn't try to manage it or minimize it, which was the right call. She would have bitten through anything gentle in that moment. "We don't know yet," he said. "We have a theory. Marcus will take it apart and see what holds." "The coat," she said. "He kept the coat deliberately. I was colder faster because of it. If I'd had the coat, I might have made it to Claire's building or found an open shop. I might not have been in that shelter when you... Serena." "He needed me immobile," she said, "stationary, in a specific location at a specific time. We don't know that he had my route, but it's possible." A long beat. "Yes," he said, "it's possible." "Then someone gave it to him." She looked at him. "Someone in your organization." Luca's face did the tightening thing. Not surprise, he had already said route leak to Marcus, so the thought was not new to him. But the confirmation of it spoken aloud in his own study by a woman he had brought into his house did something to the set of his jaw that was different from everything she'd seen before. It was old. Whatever that expression was, it was old, and it had been earned the hard way. "Yes," he said again. Quieter. "So Grant found a way in," she said. "He found someone in your world who could be bought or pressured, and he bought or pressured them, and he used them to..." She stopped. The full shape of it was arriving in pieces. "He wanted me here, Luca. He wanted me inside this house. Why?" Marcus appeared before Luca could answer. He came in fast, which was itself new information. Marcus moved at one speed, and it was deliberate, and this was not that. "Voss filed the CPS report," Marcus said, 20 minutes ago. "We have a contact inside the 4th District. It's already been logged and assigned. An investigator named Brandt. She's good. She's thorough. She's not corrupt." He paused. "That's the bad version. A corrupt investigator we could manage. A good one we can only work with honestly, which means the household gets examined at full depth." "When?" Luca said. "She'll make contact today. Possibly this afternoon." Luca looked at the clock on the study wall. 7:52 in the morning. The children hadn't left for school yet. Mila was upstairs finishing breakfast. Noah was in his room. Arya was... "Where's Arya?" Serena said. Both men looked at her. "She heard things last night," Serena said. "She was in the hallway when you and Marcus were talking. She's 16 and she processes everything, and she has a history with CPS investigations, and she..." Serena was already moving toward the door. "Where is she?" "She wasn't in her room." The door was open, bed made with the precision of someone who had been awake long enough to make it carefully, school uniform on the chair folded but not worn. Serena checked the bathroom, checked the small reading room at the end of the East Wing hall that Arya had claimed as a semi-private space in the way teenagers claim corners. Not there. She found her in the garage. Arya was sitting on the hood of the rearmost SUV, not one of the armored convoy vehicles, just the household car, the one Inez used for groceries, with her knees pulled to her chest and her phone face down beside her, and her eyes fixed on the middle distance with the specific quality of someone who has already decided something and is waiting for the decision to solidify. Beside her, on the hood of the car, was a bag, not large, efficiently packed, the bag of someone who knows how to pack fast because they have done it before, in conditions where speed mattered more than thoroughness. Serena stopped in the garage doorway. She looked at the bag and she looked at Arya, and she understood immediately and completely what she was looking at, because she had packed that same bag herself, in her own way, 8 years ago and 6 years ago and 4 years ago, every time she had stood at the edge of leaving something and pulled back from it. The bag of a person who loves a place enough to prepare to lose it before it can be taken. "You were listening last night," Serena said. Arya didn't look at her. "I live here." "I know." "I wasn't eavesdropping. I was getting water and the door was open." She picked at a thread on her uniform skirt. "I heard enough." Serena came into the garage. She didn't approach the car. She leaned against the wall 10 feet away and put her hands in her pockets and looked at nothing in particular and let the silence sit for a moment. "CPS investigator," Arya said finally. Her voice was flat and controlled, the flatness of pressure. Coming today. Probably. They'll interview the kids separately. She said the kids with a slight distance from the category the way teenagers do, as if they are adjacent to childhood rather than in it. They'll ask if we feel safe. They'll ask if there's anything concerning in the household. A pause. They always ask that last one like it's casual, like it's not the whole reason they're there. I know how those interviews go, Serena said. I did my student placement in a family services office. Arya looked at her then. Sharp, quick, assessing. You worked in family services. Placement year, before I changed direction. Serena paused. I sat in on a lot of those interviews, from the other side of the table. Something in Arya's posture shifted. Not much, a degree, but Serena caught it. Then you know they're not actually looking for the truth, Arya said. They're looking for the story that fits the report they've already received. The good ones aren't. Brant is a good one, apparently. Apparently. Arya looked at the bag beside her. She didn't touch it. Last time I had a CPS visit, I was 12. Different placement. The investigator was good too. She asked all the right questions and she listened carefully and she wrote everything down, and 3 weeks later I was moved anyway because the paperwork said something different from what I'd told her. Her voice had not changed. The flatness was doing a tremendous amount of work. Good ones still operate inside the system. The system has its own logic. Yes, Serena said. It does. So? Arya looked at her. Why are you still here? Your being here is what triggered the report. If you leave, the report loses its central claim. If I leave, Grant wins, Serena said, and he photographs your sister again next week with a better lens. The silence that followed was different from the previous ones. Arya's face did something complicated and brief. Then her jaw set. Mila doesn't know, Arya said. No. Noah figured it out this morning. He's been monitoring the news aggregators since Tuesday. He set up alerts. Don't tell my dad. He'll confiscate the tablet. She looked at Serena steadily. Noah's not scared. He's angry, which for him is worse, because when he's angry, he goes internal and stops eating and doesn't sleep, and nobody can get to him. She said this with the precise, unsentimental expertise of a sibling who has been paying close attention for 4 years. He needs someone to talk to who isn't my dad. My dad is... She paused. My dad makes him want to be brave, which is not what he needs right now. What does he need right now? Someone who'll let him be 12. She looked at her hands. Someone who won't turn his feelings into a problem to be managed. Serena said nothing. She let that sit in the air between them the way it needed to. Arya slid off the hood of the car. She stood there for a moment. Then she picked up the packed bag and she walked to the back of the garage and she put it in the storage cabinet in the corner and she shut the door. She didn't look at Serena while she did it. She picked up her uniform jacket from where it had been folded over the car's mirror, put it on, and straightened the collar with the automatic precision of habit. I'm going to school, she said. Okay, Serena said. If Brant comes today and interviews me. She stopped. She turned and looked at Serena with the full uncovered force of her face, the mask entirely down for the 3 seconds it took to say, don't let them take Mila somewhere for the interview. She has to stay in the house. She's okay in the house. She falls apart in neutral spaces, in offices, in rooms that don't smell like anything. She needs to be where she can hear Inez in the background. Her voice had cracked, just slightly, on Mila, and she covered it immediately. Tell my dad. I'll tell him, Serena said. Arya walked out of the garage. Her footsteps were even and deliberate all the way down the hall. Serena stood in the garage for a long moment with her hands in her pockets, and the storage cabinet door closed in front of her. Then she turned and went to find Luca. Investigator Brant arrived at 2:15. She was younger than Serena expected, mid-30s, compact, with short natural hair, and the particular quality of attention that distinguishes people who are genuinely good at a hard job from people who are merely performing competence. She came alone, which was its own kind of statement. She accepted coffee from Inez with a brief, genuine thank you. She sat at the kitchen table and set her notebook on it and looked around the kitchen with unhurried eyes that took in everything without announcing they were doing so. Luca sat across from her. Serena sat to his left. Rice, his attorney, sat to his right, which Brandt acknowledged with a nod that said she had expected legal representation and had no objection to it. "I'm going to be straightforward with you," Brandt said. She had a Midwest directness that Serena recognized and immediately respected. "I've read the report. I've also read the counterfiling your attorney submitted this morning. I've seen the Tribune article and the aggregator piece. I've looked at the photographs." She paused. "I've also spoken to a colleague at the 4th District who knows Patrick Voss, and she gave me some background I found useful." Go. She looked at Luca. "I'm not here to execute a strategy. I'm here to determine whether the children in this household are safe. That's the full scope of my interest." "We understand," Rice said. "I'd like to speak to each child separately," Brandt said. "In this house, in a room of their choosing, a guardian can be present for the 7-year-old. The older two, I'll ask them their preference." She looked at Serena. "And I'd like to speak to you, separately from Mr. DeSantis. Standard procedure." "Of course," Serena said. They set an order. Mila first, with Inez present at her request. Inez, not Luca, which surprised everyone except Serena, who had watched Mila navigate the morning and understood that Inez was Mila's safe person in the specific way of someone who has never been anything but constant. Then Noah, then Arya, then Serena, then Luca last. Mila's interview lasted 22 minutes. Serena could hear the edges of it from the hallway. Not the words, but the quality. Mila's voice at its characteristic velocity. Brandt's lower register asking something. Mila's acceleration in response. At one point there was laughter. Mila's bright and total, and Serena exhaled. Noah's took 40 minutes and was completely silent from the outside. When he came out, his face was careful and closed, and he walked directly to his room without speaking to anyone, which was exactly what Arya had predicted. And Serena caught Luca's arm before he could follow, and she shook her head once, and he held, for the 4 seconds it cost him to hold, and then he nodded. She went to Noah's room herself. She knocked. He said, "Come in," with the voice of someone who is holding themselves together with both hands. She went in and sat on the floor against the wall. Not on the chair, not on the desk. The floor, which was the non-authoritative position, the one that said, "I'm not here to manage you." And she said, "You don't have to talk." He sat on the edge of his bed. He looked at his hands. After a long time, he said, "She asked me if I'd ever seen anything in this house that scared me." "What did you say?" "I said yes." He paused. "I said the scariest thing I've ever seen in this house was the night my dad got the call about the root leak. Because his face, he didn't know I was awake. He thought everyone was asleep." He looked up at her. His eyes were 12 years old and 100 years old at the same time. He looked like someone had taken something from him. Not anger, just loss, like he was losing something. A pause. "I told her that scared me more than any of the security stuff. The guns and the guards and the cameras, those just mean he's careful. But that face meant he was human." Serena sat with that. "She asked if I felt safe," he said. "I said yes. I said the only thing threatening my safety right now is a man named Grant Whitlock and his attorney, which she already knew, because her face did the thing faces do when you say the thing they were waiting for you to say." He was 12 years old, and he had delivered that observation with the calm precision of someone twice his age. And Serena thought, this child is remarkable, and also he is exhausted, and also he has been doing the work of being remarkable for far too long without anyone simply sitting on the floor next to him. She sat on the floor next to him for another 20 minutes. She didn't talk much. He didn't either. It was enough. Her own interview with Brandt lasted 35 minutes. She told the full story. The appointment, the drive home, the kitchen, the envelope on the floor, the deadbolt, the 3 blocks in the blizzard, the bus shelter, the convoy. She told it without editorializing, without performing distress, with the same flat accuracy she'd have used to recount someone else's experience. She set her phone on the table and showed Brandt the texts from the night. The call log. The voicemail where Grant said come home before she'd told anyone where she was. Brandt looked at the voicemail timestamp. She wrote something down. "The location sharing," Serena said. "We never turned it off. He knew exactly where I was when I stopped moving. He knew I was in that shelter." Brandt looked up. That's in the counterfiling? It will be. Rice added it this morning. Brant wrote something else. Her face gave nothing away, but her pen was moving faster. When she came out of the interview room, Luca's study, chosen by Brant without visible reason, and perhaps for very good ones, she walked directly into the full collision of the day. Marcus coming from the east wing fast, Luca already on his feet across the hall, Rice with his phone at his ear, and from upstairs, barely audible, the sound of Mila asking Inez something in a voice that was working very hard to stay small and calm. "We have the photographer's ID," Marcus said. He was speaking to Luca, but he was in the hallway and everyone could hear him. "Name is Roy Curran. Freelance. Has done work for 3 different outlets, but his most recent payments, past 6 weeks, traced to a shell company that Rice's team has been working. The shell connects to a holding company." He paused. "The holding company is registered to a name we know." "Voss," Luca said. "Not Voss." Marcus looked at him steadily. "Whitlock Properties, LLC. Grant Whitlock is the registered agent." The hallway went very still. "He paid for the photographer directly," Rice said, lowering his phone. "Not through Voss, his own entity. That's—" He stopped, looked at his phone, looked back. "That's not what careful people do." "He's not being careful anymore," Serena said. She could hear her own heartbeat. "He stopped being careful because something changed. Something made him move faster than he planned." She looked at Luca. "The root leak investigation. When you told Marcus to find the leak, someone told him. Someone in your organization told him you were looking." Luca's face. She had seen it do many things in the past 4 days. She had not seen it do this. A compression so total and so rapid that it looked almost like nothing. A man pulling every available resource inward in the space of 2 seconds, which was the face of someone who has been betrayed in a very specific place and is calculating the exact weight of it. "Who knew about the investigation?" he said. His voice was completely flat, completely quiet. Marcus said, "Myself, Rice, Carver." Carver was the head of the security team. Serena had seen him twice, a gray-haired man of few words who stood near the front entrance and moved the perimeter guards with hand signals and brief radio communication. A man who had been, from every visible indication, a permanent and trusted feature of this household's architecture. "Carver has been with you how long?" Rice said slowly. 9 years, Luca said. Serena thought of Elena, the targeted car. A Tuesday evening in October. They used her routine. They watched. They waited. She thought of that, and she saw the same thought arrive in Luca's face, and she watched it move through him like a current, watched it reach his eyes and stay there, cold and devastating and perfectly controlled. "Find him," Luca said. Marcus was already moving. Marcus. What happened in the next 4 minutes happened fast and in fragments. Marcus on his radio, 2 guards moving through the east wing, the sound of the front door, a sharp exchange of voices outside that Serena heard but couldn't parse. Rice moving to the window and going very still. Brant standing in the hallway of a household that had just changed shape around her with the particular alertness of a woman deciding very rapidly whether she is a participant or a witness. Then Luca's phone rang. He looked at the screen. His face did nothing but his hand tightened on the phone. Just once, a single flex of his fingers, before he answered. "Mr. DeSantis." The voice was Grant Whitlock's, and it came through on speaker because Luca had pressed the button without breaking eye contact with Serena, and she understood that was intentional, that he was giving her the full thing, all of it, no filtered version. Grant's voice was smooth and warm and completely artificial, the voice of a man who has been rehearsing this particular call. "I think it's time we had a direct conversation." "I agree," Luca said. "I want my wife back," Grant said. Simple. Warm. Insane. "I want her home. I want this resolved quietly. And I want the investigation into my business interests to end. I think those are very reasonable requests given the circumstances." A pause. "I also think you're a man who understands leverage, so let me be clear about mine." Serena's hands were ice. "I have documentation," Grant said. "Specific documentation relating to certain activities in the Northern Lake District. Financial documentation. The kind that would be very interesting to the Tribune, to the 4th District, and to several federal agencies that have had an interest in your family's operations for a number of years." Another pause. I've had it for 3 months. I haven't used it because I was hoping this situation wouldn't require escalation. But if Serena doesn't come home today, this evening, of her own free will and on the record, then tomorrow morning, every piece of that documentation goes to every address I just mentioned. Ishapao Itakan. The hallway was completely silent. Brant was still there, still listening. Her notebook was closed. Her pen was in her hand, but not moving, and her face had the specific quality of someone who is absorbing information that is changing the shape of something significant. And if she does come home, Luca said. His voice was so level it was almost conversational. The documentation disappears. It becomes irrelevant, Grant said. Those are different things. A beat. Yes, Grant said. They are. I suppose they are. Something shifted in his voice. Not the warmth. The warmth stayed. But underneath it, something else surfaced for 1 second. Something that was colder and more honest, and suggested that the warmth had always been the performance, and this was the actual person. I always find that the most successful negotiations are the ones where everyone understands exactly what's being exchanged. Luca looked at Serena. She looked back. The whole weight of it was in the air between them. The children upstairs, Mila's voice still a faint presence through the ceiling, Noah in his room with his hands in his lap, Arya, who had packed a bag and unpacked it, and gone to school and come home and sat through an investigator's questions with her chin up and her history visible in every careful word. The 9 years of Carver, the Tuesday in October that had taken Elena, the route that had put Serena in that bus shelter. All of it converging here, in this hallway, in this phone call, at this exact moment. I'll need to speak with Serena privately, Luca said into the phone. Give me 1 hour. 1 hour, Grant said. Pleased. Of course. Luca ended the call. He set the phone on the hall table and looked at Serena, and the look between them was very long and very direct and carried an enormous amount of weight without a word of it being spoken. Brant had stepped back. Rice was on his phone. The house was doing its quiet settling around them. Heat through pipes, wind off the lake against the north-facing windows. He's bluffing, Serena said. Partially. He has something. He wouldn't have held it 3 months if he had nothing. But the scope of it, the scope is what matters, Luca said. Yes. He looked at her for another moment. Then he looked at the ceiling, toward the sound of Mila, toward Noah's room, toward Arya, who was probably at her desk doing homework, with the focused intensity of someone who uses work as ballast when the world tilts. He built this entire thing, Luca said quietly, to put you in this hallway making this choice. I know. He wants you to feel responsible, he said, for what happens to my family if you don't go. He wants that weight on you. I know, she said again. Steadier this time. Serena. He said her name differently than he had before. Not a handle, not a location marker, something closer to the way you say a name when you're talking to the actual person rather than their circumstances. Whatever you decide, this is not your fault. None of this is your... I know whose fault it is, she said. Her voice had gone to the bottom place again, the solid floor. And I know what I'm going to do. He waited. She looked at him with all of it present in her face. Everything she'd been carrying since the foyer on Birchwood Lane, the deadbolt, the coat, the bus shelter, the 4 days inside this house that had been more real and more present than the previous 8 years of her life. And she said, call Rice back in here, and call Marcus. Because I am not going anywhere, and Grant Whitlock is going to learn tonight exactly what happens when a man mistakes the patience of a woman for weakness. She said it, and she meant every syllable of it, and she watched it land in Luca's face, not as a surprise, but as a confirmation. The arrival of something he had been waiting to see since the night he'd pulled her out of a bus shelter and driven her through a blizzard to a house she didn't know yet was already, in some structural way she couldn't have named at the time, hers. Reese came back. Marcus came back. Brant, who had no legal obligation to stay and every professional reason to leave, and instead stood in the kitchen doorway with her notebook open again, stayed. Serena sat at the kitchen table and she laid it out. Not the emotional version, not the version where she was a wronged woman recounting damage for sympathy. The operational version, clean, sequential, with timestamps where she had them and documented evidence where she didn't. The location sharing she'd never disabled, the coat removed from the bag before she was sent into a blizzard. The precise timing of Grant's first call at 6:45 before she'd spoken to anyone, which meant he'd tracked her phone to this address overnight. The article in the aggregator, published with the photograph of Mila that had been taken by a hired photographer, Roy Curran, now identified, now traceable, directly to Whitlock Properties LLC, not to Voss, to Grant himself, which was the mistake careful men don't make, and which meant Grant had stopped being careful because something had panicked him. "The root leak," Serena said. She looked at Marcus. "When Luca asked you to find the leak, someone told Grant within hours. That means the leak isn't someone Grant recruited slowly. It's someone who was already in contact with him. Someone with fast access to Luca's inner decisions who could relay information same day." She paused. "How long has Carver been unaccounted for?" 40 minutes, Marcus said. "He's not running," she said. "He'd have run before now if he was going to run. He stayed this long because Grant told him to stay. Because Carver's function wasn't just the root. His function was to be here, inside the household, when this moment arrived." She looked at Luca. Grant needed someone who could testify to conditions inside the house. Someone with credibility. A senior security employee with 9 years in the household is credible. Luca's face was very still. "That's the documentation," Serena said. "Or part of it. It's not financial records, or not only. It's testimony. Carver's first-hand account of whatever Grant has coached him to say he witnessed inside this house. Combined with the photographs, the police report, the CPS filing, it's a package. It's designed to be a package." Rice had been writing. He looked up. "That's constructible," he said. "If Carver gave a signed statement to Voss's office at any point in the last 3 months, find out," Luca said. Rice was on his phone before the sentence ended. Grant had not moved from the doorway. She had been listening with the total attention of someone who is simultaneously processing information and making a series of quiet, consequential decisions. She looked at Serena now. A direct level look. The first one she'd given her that wasn't filtered through the professional screen of the investigation. "Ms. Whitlock," she said, "the report I was assigned to investigate alleged that you were being held in this household under duress and prevented from contacting your family." She paused. "I have listened to everything you've just said. I have reviewed the documentation your attorney provided this morning, and I have conducted interviews with 3 members of this household who, without coordination or rehearsal, gave me a consistent and credible account of a functional, safe, and stable home." Another pause. "I'm going to recommend closure of this investigation with a finding of no basis. I'll have the formal documentation filed by end of day." The kitchen was quiet. "The false report and the coordinated harassment campaign are a separate matter," Brandt said. "That's not my jurisdiction, but I'll be noting the pattern of conduct in my closure report in terms that will be useful to whoever takes it next." She looked at Serena steadily. "I hope you have a good attorney." "She does," Rice said, not looking up from his phone. Brandt picked up her notebook and her coffee cup and she left, and the kitchen exhaled around her departure. Luca found Carver in the east garden. He was sitting on the stone bench near the back wall, the one that faced the lake, the one that had been there since before the house was modified into what it currently was. He was in his coat. He was looking at the water. He didn't turn when Luca came out, but the slight shift in his shoulders said he knew. Serena watched from the kitchen window. She didn't go out. This was not hers to witness directly. Some things have to happen without an audience, and she understood which things those were. Marcus stood at the garden door. Just stood. Luca walked to the bench and stood beside it for a moment and then sat down, which was not what Carver had expected. She could tell from the way his posture changed, the particular way a person's body registers surprise when they've prepared themselves for something and receive something else. They talked for 11 minutes. She could not hear any of it. She watched the quality of it, Luca's back, the line of it, which was not aggressive, not performing dominance, just present. Carver's hands on his knees, which began with a grip, and slowly, over those 11 minutes, loosened. At the 8-minute mark, Carver turned and looked at the house, and she saw his face from across the garden, and she looked away. She didn't need to see that. She already knew what it looked like, the face of a person accounting for the gap between who they intended to be and what they actually did. She had worn a version of it herself, in various forms, over the past 8 years. When Luca came back inside, he poured himself a glass of water and drank it, standing at the sink, and said, Grant approached him 14 months ago, before Elena's anniversary. He knew the date, he used it. His voice was measured and even and completely bloodless in the way of someone who has already felt the thing and moved through it and come out the other side of it into function. He offered money, and he offered something else. Documentation that Carver's brother had been involved in a supply chain issue 3 years ago that was resolved internally. He said he'd surface it if Carver didn't cooperate. Blackmail, Serena said. Yes. Luca set the glass down. Carver gave him the route that night, the blizzard night, and he gave him enough logistical detail over the past 4 days to build the harassment timeline. He paused. He didn't know about the photographer and Mila. He says he didn't know that part. Do you believe him? A long pause. I don't know yet, Luca said. I think I might, which makes it more complicated, not less. She understood that. The things done to you by people who aren't simply evil, who are frightened or cornered or made of the same materials as everyone else and just failed under pressure, those are harder to resolve than the clean, uncomplicated betrayals. What happens now, she said, with Carver? He's done here, Luca said. He knows that. He's also going to provide Rice with a full account of every contact he had with Grant and Voss. Every communication, every instruction, every piece of information he passed. That account becomes part of our legal file. He turned from the sink. In exchange for that account, I won't pursue the matter further with him personally. That's the arrangement. That's fair, she said. It's functional, he said. There was a difference, and they both knew it, and neither of them pushed on it. She called Grant at 4:47. 1 hour and 3 minutes after Luca had told him to wait. 3 minutes over, deliberately, because she was done operating on his timeline. He answered on the second ring. He had been waiting. She could hear it. Serena, he said. The warm voice, the rehearsed one. I'm not coming home, she said. I want to be very clear about that, so there's no ambiguity going forward. I am never coming home. What you did on the night of the blizzard, the deliberate removal of my coat, the location tracking, the timing, I have documentation and testimony that covers all of it, and by tomorrow morning it will be in the hands of my attorney, Rice's office, the 4th District, and 3 journalists who are not Patrick Voss's contacts and are therefore interested in the actual story. Silence. The documentation you claim to have, she said. Use it if you have it. File it, send it, do whatever you were going to do with it. But understand that when you do, what comes back in response will be everything. Carver's full account of your 14 months of coordination, the shell company traces to Roy Curran and Whitlock Properties, the false police report, the fabricated CPS filing, the photograph of a 7-year-old child taken with a long lens by a hired photographer. Bo amit saipam bote, she paused. Patrick Voss is good at what he does, but Rice is better, and I am no longer someone who can be moved by the threat of consequences, Grant, because you have already given me the worst of them, and I am still here. A very long silence. You have nothing, he said. The warm voice was gone. What was underneath it was thinner and more brittle and finally, honest. You came out of that storm with nothing. You had nowhere to go. I had a coat, she said. You took it, and I survived anyway. She let that sit for exactly 1 beat. Don't contact me again except through attorneys. Don't contact this household. Don't send anyone to this address. We're done. She ended the call. Her hand was not shaking. She noticed that with a mild, distant interest, the absence of tremor, the steadiness of her own grip, the fact that she was sitting at the kitchen table in a house that smelled like Inez's cooking and felt like something she had not had before, not once, not in 30 years, and her hand was completely steady. Mila appeared in the kitchen doorway in her after-school clothes, leggings and an oversized sweatshirt with a cartoon on it that Serena could not identify. And she looked at Serena with those enormous eyes and said, "Are you okay?" "Yes," Serena said. "You look like you did a hard thing." "I did." Mila considered this seriously. "Inez says hard things make your insides stronger," she said. "Like exercise, but for feelings." Inez is right. I know. Mila came to the table and climbed onto the stool beside her without being invited and without question, with the complete ease of someone who has decided a thing is hers and has stopped treating it as provisional. Do you want to watch a movie tonight? I pick on Thursdays. I was going to pick the one about the penguins, but I could pick something else if you want. The one about the penguins sounds good, Serena said. It's really good, Mila confirmed. Some parts are sad, but the ending is good. I always watch the ending part twice. Serena looked at her. At this 7-year-old who had been used as a target by a man she'd never met, who didn't know it, and who was right now entirely focused on the negotiation of Thursday movie selection. And she felt something move in her chest. Not break, not crack. Move. The specific internal motion of something that has been held very tightly for a very long time, beginning, cautiously, and with good reason for caution, to open. Then we'll watch it twice, she said. Mila beamed. The legal proceedings took 4 months. Reese was, as advertised, better than Voss. The counterfiling landed with the weight of everything they'd built. Carver's testimony, the shell company traces, the phone records, the location data, the coat, the time-stamped photographs, and the photographer's own statement once it became clear that cooperation was the better option than the alternative. Patrick Voss withdrew from the case in February, which was not an admission of anything, but was also not the behavior of a man who believed his position was defensible. Grant's documentation turned out to be partially real and entirely misrepresented. Fragments of financial records from Luca's legitimate business operations, stripped of context and sequencing, the kind of thing that looks alarming in isolation and unremarkable when the full picture is restored. Rice restored the full picture with the methodical thoroughness of someone who enjoys this particular kind of work. The federal inquiry that Grant had implied was imminent turned out to be a periodic review that had been ongoing for years and had consistently found nothing actionable, a fact which Voss had known and which had not stopped him from describing it to his client as leverage. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday in March. Serena was sitting in Rice's office when the notification came through on her phone, and she looked at it for a moment and then set the phone face down on the conference table and looked at the window, which framed a rectangle of gray Chicago sky with a thin line of bare tree branches at the bottom of it. And she breathed in and out twice, and that was the entirety of her ceremony for the end of 8 years. Reese pretended to be looking at something on his desk. He was considerate that way. She moved out of the guest room in April. Not out of the house, out of the guest room, into the room at the end of the east wing that had better light and a view of the garden rather than the lake, and that had been, everyone understood without discussing it directly, available for a while. She enrolled in the graduate program at Northwestern in May. The application had been half written on her laptop for 2 years, one of those things maintained in a state of near completion as a private hedge against a life that wasn't working, a door held slightly open in case she needed it. She finished it in a single evening in February, sitting at the kitchen table while Noah did calculus across from her and Mila drew horses on the back of her scratch paper, and she submitted it at 11:43 at night and closed the laptop, and that was that. The acceptance came on a Wednesday. She was making coffee. She had finally, after 4 months, learned the trick of the machine. When her phone showed the notification and she stood in the kitchen in the early morning and read it twice, and then set the phone down and finished making the coffee, and stood at the counter with both cups and waited. Luca came downstairs at 6:45, as he always did, suit not yet on, the pre-armor version of himself that only the household saw, and he stopped in the kitchen doorway when he registered her face. "What happened?" he said. She handed him the coffee. "I got in," she said. "Full scholarship." He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face was doing the thing it did sometimes in the evenings, when the house had settled and the day was done and the armor was down, the thing she had no name for yet that she suspected, with a certainty she was still approaching carefully, was the same thing she felt when she looked at him. "Tell me something," he said. "What?" "The night I stopped the convoy." He was watching her carefully. "If you had known, the whole thing, Carver, Grant, all of it, if you had known it wasn't an accident, would you have gotten in the car?" She thought about it honestly. She owed him that. "I don't know," she said. "Maybe not." She looked at her coffee. "But I know I would have ended up here anyway, some longer, harder way. Because—" She stopped, started again. "Because Mila would have found me somehow. She has that energy." He laughed. Actual laughter, not the controlled, brief version, but the real one, sudden and unguarded. And it changed his face completely. opened it, and she thought again. There you are. And this time she didn't look away from it. She would have, he agreed. They stood in the kitchen in the early morning while the house woke up around them, and it was ordinary, and it was specific, and it was entirely, completely real. The conversation she and Luca had been not having for 4 months finally happened on a Sunday evening in late May, when the children were in various states of post-weekend wind down, and the house was quiet in the particular way of a place that has absorbed a full week and is letting it go. He found her on the back terrace. She was leaning on the railing looking at the lake, which was doing something extraordinary in the evening light. A flat, hammered silver that caught the last of the sun and held it. She heard him come out, and she didn't turn immediately, and he came to stand beside her at the railing, and they were both quiet for a while, looking at the water. "I need to say something to you," he said. "Okay." He was quiet for another moment. He was choosing his words with the care of a man who knows the weight of them and does not spend them carelessly. "When Elena died," he said, "I stopped expecting anything, not in a dramatic way, not collapse. Just, I stopped expecting anything from the future that was personal. Professional, yes. For the children, yes. But for myself," he paused. "I made a calculation that the best I could do was build walls high enough that nothing else could get in and damage what was left." She said nothing. Let him finish. "You came through the wall in a blizzard," he said, "without trying, without a plan." A pause. "I am aware of the irony that Grant engineered the geography of it and got nothing he intended from it." "He got the geography wrong," she said. "He thought putting me in your path would create a problem for you. He didn't account for the possibility that it would create the opposite." "No," Luca said. He didn't understand that. He turned from the railing and looked at her directly. The full force of that reading everything attention, except now it was not reading for threat assessment or variable calculation. It was just looking at her, completely, without a purpose beyond the looking. "I'm not good at this," he said. "I want to be honest about that. I've been outside it for 4 years, and I was not especially graceful at it before that. I've had 8 years of the wrong version of it," she said. "I'm not exactly qualified to evaluate grace." "Then we're evenly handicapped." "Evenly handicapped," she repeated. "That's the most romantic framing I've ever heard. I told you I wasn't good at this." She turned to look at him. She looked at his face in the evening light, the tiredness in it, and the steadiness under the tiredness, and the things she had been watching approach for 4 months, cautiously and from a distance, and which was now simply present, close, and real, and asking nothing of her except the same honesty she had been asking of herself since the night she walked out of a foyer on Birchwood Lane and into a blizzard. "Luca," she said. "Yes." "Stop talking." He did. What happened next was not dramatic. It was quiet, and it was certain, and it was the kind of thing that doesn't require an audience. And the lake went on doing its silver business in the evening light, and the house behind them held its breath for exactly as long as it needed to. Later, much later, months later, when summer had become fall and fall had become the particular Chicago winter that arrives with intent, Serena would try to identify the moment when the house stopped feeling like a place she was staying and started feeling like a place she lived. She could never locate it precisely. It wasn't one moment. It was 1,000 small ones, each unremarkable on its own. The morning she stopped checking where the towels were kept because she already knew. The evening she sat down at the kitchen table and reached for the salt shaker without looking and found it exactly where she expected. The Tuesday in October when she drove Mila to a school event and brought her home and made hot chocolate and listened to Mila's complete and detailed account of every social interaction that had occurred over 4 hours. And at some point during the account, Serena realized she was not performing attentiveness. She was simply paying attention, fully, with the whole of herself because she wanted to. It was Noah who asked her in November, sitting across from her at the kitchen table over the history project that had become a standing weekly institution. He asked it the way he asked most important things, sideways, approaching from an angle, not looking at her directly. "Are you going to stay?" he said. He was looking at his notes. His pen was still. She looked at him. "Yes," she said. He looked up. He looked at her with the 12 years and 100 years eyes. "Even when it's hard," he said. "Not just when it's good." "Even when it's hard," she said. "Especially then." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once, the precise adult nod of someone who has asked the real question and received the real answer, and looked back at his notes. "Okay," he said. "So about the Marshall Plan." "Yes," she said, "the Marshall Plan." The proposal happened in December under snow. Not a private moment, as it turned out. Luca had planned it as one, had arranged for the children to be elsewhere, had a whole quiet and unwitnessed version of it mapped in his head. What actually happened was that it was snowing, and Mila had seen the snow and come running downstairs and insisted on going outside immediately, and the quiet plan evaporated in approximately 40 seconds, because that is what happens when you live with a Mila. And so it happened in the front garden with all three children present, Noah with his phone because he had anticipated something was happening, Mila in her boots and her bright red coat bouncing in the snow, Arya standing slightly apart with her arms crossed and her chin up and her eyes bright in the cold. Luca dropped to one knee in the snow. Mila made a sound like a small contained explosion. Arya turned away and looked at the sky and pressed the back of her hand to her mouth, which Serena saw and which she would remember for the rest of her life. That gesture, that particular combination of the reflex to hide feeling and the inability to fully succeed at it. Noah recorded everything. His hands were perfectly steady. Serena looked at Luca, kneeling in the snow in his coat, the cold turning his breath visible, his face completely open in the way it had been on the terrace in May, the armor entirely down. And she thought about a bus shelter in a blizzard, and a deadbolt sound, and a charcoal coat pulled from a closet, and the vast, improbable geometry of all the things that had had to happen wrong to bring her here, to this garden, to this snow, to this exact moment with these specific people. She thought, Grant took my coat to make me colder. She thought, it didn't work. Yes, she said. Mila's contained explosion became uncontained. Noah lowered his phone and did something he almost never did in front of witnesses. He smiled, wide and unguarded, a 12-year-old's whole face. Arya turned back around, and there were tears on her face, and she looked at Serena with the full uncovered force of everything she'd spent 4 years learning to protect. And she said nothing, because some things are beyond the reach of words, and they both understood that. Luca stood up. He was not particularly graceful about it. The snow was wet, and his knee was cold, and he nearly slipped and caught himself. And Serena laughed, actually laughed, and he shook his head with the expression of a man who is simultaneously embarrassed and so fundamentally happy that the embarrassment cannot find purchase. I told you, he said, not good at this. You're perfect at this, she said. Mila inserted herself between them with the confidence of a force of nature and wrapped both arms around Serena's waist and held on with the complete, unqualified commitment of someone who has never once considered that love might have conditions. And Serena put her hand on the back of Mila's head and held on back, and the snow came down around all of them, quiet and indifferent and cold and beautiful. The years arranged themselves the way years do, not in a line but in layers, each one settling over the ones before it, changing the texture of things, deepening the color. Serena finished her graduate degree in the spring. Her thesis, on continuity of attachment and identity stability and non-biological family formation, was published in an academic journal and then, more unexpectedly, excerpted in a national magazine, which generated more letters to the editor than the magazine had received on any topic in 3 years, most of them from people who said some version of, "This is my family, we have no name for it, thank you for giving us one." She built a practice. Not quickly, not cleanly. It had the texture of real work, difficult and slow, and marked by failures she had to sit with and learn from and try again. She worked with adoptive families and with children who had moved through systems not designed with their best interests at the center, and she worked with the specific, unspectacular, essential dailiness of repair, the kind that doesn't look like anything from the outside, that happens in small rooms over long time, that shows up years later in the steadiness of a person you can't fully trace back to the hours that built it. Luca, over those years, moved steadily and without fanfare toward the kind of man he had always had the potential to be when the immediate demands of survival were no longer the organizing principle of every decision. He did not become simple. He did not become entirely clean in every sense of the word. His history was his history, and the world he had operated in left marks that don't fully resolve. But he was present for his family with a completeness that had not been possible when grief and vigilance and the architecture of protection were taking up all available space. He was a better father. He knew it. The children knew it. Serena watched it happen the way you watch a long-held breath finally release. Arya came home from college on a Sunday in October, not at the end of term, not for any scheduled occasion, just on a Sunday because she wanted to. She came in through the kitchen door with her bag and her coat and the particular quality of ease that people develop when they have spent enough time somewhere safe. That safe has become their baseline expectation rather than an ongoing surprise. She dropped her bag in the hallway, which was a thing she had not done as a teenager because she kept her things close, and she sat at the kitchen table and ate Inez's food and talked for 2 hours about nothing consequential. And at some point in those 2 hours, Serena looked at her, at this young woman who had packed a bag and unpacked it and stayed, who had learned over years that some people mean it when they say they're staying. And she thought, there it is. That's what it looks like. On a winter evening in their 5th year in New York, they had made the move. It had gone the way large and frightening things go when you do them with people who know how to stay. Serena stood on the balcony and looked at the city below her. Snow was falling, the particular kind that falls over Manhattan at night and catches every light and multiplies it, so that the city below seemed to be generating its own weather, its own warmth, its own indifferent and magnificent evidence of 10 million lives proceeding simultaneously in all their complexity. She thought about a bus shelter. She thought about charcoal gray. She thought about the sound of a deadbolt and the sound of Mila's voice the first time she heard it, coming from the back of a bulletproof car, telling her facts about snow. Luca came out onto the balcony. He stood beside her and looked at the city, and she felt the warmth of him next to her in the cold air, and she did not say anything, and he did not say anything, and they stood there together in the snow, and the silence was the specific kind that is not empty but full of everything that has been said and done and survived and chosen, every ordinary Tuesday and every crisis and every movie watched twice because the ending is good, and the silence held all of it without effort, the way a house holds the people inside it, present and solid and real. She took his hand. The snow fell on. The city blazed below them. Somewhere inside the apartment, Mila was telling facts to someone, at full velocity, without pause. Some things don't change. The best things don't have to. Fade out.